Okay. Tanan Bereish Mesachtes Rosh Hashanah, Arba Rosh Hashanah Mei. Ba'alef Benissen, Rosh Hashanah Lemlachim V'Regalim. That when they start counting for documents, Rishtaris, and they have to write the year of this and this king, so they start from the year, from the first Nissen, from Aleph Ben Nissen, that's considered the new year. So it's like every Nissen, it's like the second year of this king, the third year of this king, and so on. And it's also the Regel, because Pesach is the first of the three Regalim, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. So therefore, Nissen is the first month of Regel. Be'echad b'shvat Rosh Hashanah le'ilan k'divrei Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel b'chamisha asar. That then is when there is the nidoinin al ha'ilan al peres ha'ilan, if it will grow or not, and so on. V'hinei mlavad ha'shayich saklol has been called out the Rosh Hashanah that the Mishnah speaks about. That he doesn't say all of it over here. The Kivim should call him Mishnah b'Mishnah Achas. First of all, the very thing that they're all in the same Mishnah, that itself shows that there's a connection. Or else, the Rebbe would not be Mesaderet in the same Mishnayos. And also, V'nikroim b'Shem Rosh Hashanah, that they all have the same name. So since they have the same name, and they're in the same Mishnah, Muvin she'esh shayches b'neim gam b'toichen and yonam. The fact that two things have the same name, and the fact that they're all in the same place, there must be that there has a connection in Toich. But in addition to that, one of the Rebbe's favorite things, taken for Chassidus, which is taken from Sefer Yetzirah, Kabbalah, is the idea of Nos Tchilasim B'Seifim. Whenever the Rebbe made a siyum, the Rebbe was Mekasher, the end of the Masechta, back to the beginning of the Masechta. Because the beginning and the end have a connection. Similar to what we say in davening, Soif Maisa v'Machshavet Chila. So the Eibishter wants to make a world, so he made all the Oilams of Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiyah, but the main thing is Oilam Haza Agashmi. That's where the Kavanah of the Eibishter is. No, it's Tchilasa, the beginning of Hashem's thought is Dafke B'Soif. Sorry, Apia, Klala Yidua. No, it's Tchilasim B'Soifon, not Soif mit Tchilasim B'Soifon. Muvan shetoichen harosh Hashanah shenishna betchilas hamishna Aleph b'Nisan Rosh Hashanah Lemlachim Velregalim Shaykh b'miyuchad l'Rosh Hashanah le'ilan shenishna b'Soif hamishna. So even though there's other Rosh Hashanahs that he speaks about over there in the Mishnah, it's Arba Rosh Hashanah Meim. Still in all, there's a special connection between the first Rosh Hashanah Lemlachim Velregalim, and the Rosh Hashanah of the Ilan. Another point that Rebbe brings out, so that itself establishes shayches miyuchadis b'neihem, because or else the very fact that they come out on the same day also shows on the shayches. Not just the b'chayim, shegimel haragolim nikvu ala tvur. Pesach bezmana aviv, so that's when it's ripening. That's when the tvur becomes ripe, ready to eat. Shavuos chag hakatzir, ktsir chitzim. That's when they cut the tvur. Chag hasukkos bezmana asiv. Then they have to gather it in after it dried in the field. They have to bring it into the house. That's sukkos. Even though tzmichsa tvur itself is, of course, something that you need to be thankful to the Eibishter, especially dealing with Eretz Yisrael, that was an agricultural society, it was based on farming, so of course, Smichas HaTvuah had a very great importance. But everything has a ruchnistik shoydish where it comes from. So this ruchnistik shoydish, al derech Chassidus is, Bnei Yisrael nikroim Tvuas Hashem. K'ma shekasav, kodesh Yisrael avaya reishes Tvuasai. It says that it's like Truma. Just like Truma, you give from the Truma, you give to the Kayin. The same thing, Yidden are called the Reishis Tvuasai. Of the entire Tvua that Hashem has, Yidden are Reishis Tvuasai. And therefore, they are Kodesh to Hashem, and no one is allowed to mishtamish with them, no one is allowed to mistreat them, because it's just like being Moyel and Hegdish, using the Truma and so on. B'ksiv, it says about Neshamas Yisrael that Hashem said, I was Zereya them in the ground. In other words, the very fact that Neshamas came down Min HaShamayim into this earth, it's like Zereya. It's like Hashem being Zereya and Neshamas Yisrael down here. Yeridas Neshamas Yisrael ba'aretz halazu, Yikmaizriya ba'aretz. And now the Rebbe brings down, so what? So we're like Tvua, so we understand why the Yom Tovim, the Shalosh Regolim, is such a big deal about Tvua. V'ni Amar Azal, Klum Adam Zereach Kur, al Lahachnis Kama Kurin, when a person plants Tvua, he does so that he plants a small amount to be able to bring in so much more. Shetachos Azriya, he ribu yatzmicha, shemechita achas, soimchos chitim rabis. V'cheinu b'nei Yisrael, that when Hashem planted the Yidden in the earth, shetachos Azriyasam ba'aretz, she yerida atzuma. Migra ramal bira mikta, from a high building, from a high roof, to a very deep pit. So why did Hashem do such a thing? Because like everything else, why would you take a kernel of wheat and stick it into the ground? It makes no sense. Why would you do it? The only reason you do it is because when you stick this kernel of wheat into the ground, you're going to get so much more chita. The same thing, why does the Eibishter take the Yidden and stick them into the ground down here? Because of what he's going to gain so much more than if they would have been before they came down here. Hitzmichas v'gidla neshama shayidei yirida zu. K'maymer ha'yedua yirida zu tzorech aliyah. Shayidei yirida s'neshama l'matam. Than even higher than it was before it came down. That is a fact, but it doesn't really give us any hira in our avodah. What about having a hira in our avodah from this? Aleph, smichas hatvua, eina ma'achita atzma nizras ba'aretz, elai de recover ha'achita nizras, sha'idei sha'azera nirka v'botel legabe koyach hatzameach sheba'aretz, hareze ma'oirer es koyach hatzameach sheba'aretz la'atzmeach shebolim shel chitim. In Chassidus it explains, in some places, in great arichas, not like we think, that it's the kernel of wheat itself that grows, or the kernel of the pit of an orange that grows. It's not that way. The koyach hatzemeach, the Eibishter put in the ground. That's where the Dvar Hashem comes from, is invested, embedded. It's in the ground. What does planting do? What does it happen when I take the kernel of wheat, or the orange pit, or whatever, and I put it in the ground? That, first of all, becomes totally in his bottle. It becomes nirkiv. It becomes completely lost. And then it triggers the koyach hatzmicha sheba'aretz.
Is it not the water? The humidity there.
I'm telling you what Chassidus talks about. The humidity and the water helps the recovering, helps it get spread around, helps it get energized, but the koyach hatzmicha itself is triggered through the kernel of wheat or the pit or whatever it is, and that also triggers what type of fruit it should be. So in other words, in the ground there's a power to have oranges and to have wheat and to have barley and to have rimonim and whatever. So whichever type of pit or kernel you plant in the ground, that's the type of koyach hatzameach, it'll be ma'orer. And very interestingly enough, that it's brought down that they're the people that understood in the ground. It says that Amei ha'aretz, I don't remember the exact lashon, and Rashi explains, and as everybody else, not people that live in the earth, they live in the heavens, but it means that these people understood the earth, and they knew that in this location on the earth, it's better to plant this and this type of plant. And this place, it's a better place for this type of tvua, and so on. Makes a lot of sense based on this idea in Chassidus. Since the kernel is really in the pit, is only being ma'oira the koyach hatzmicha to go to this particular type of growth, so it's understood that might be some place on the earth that the koyach hatzamech for this type of fruit is in a more revealed way, and therefore when you plant a seed from this fruit over here, this is a good place for it to take. What is it beruchnius? What does that mean? by the Neshama v'yid, Eina Tosefes shel Kamas L'chut, Shemechita Achas Naser Ribuy Gadol, Ela Yesh Loimar Shikama Yishavas Chadosha Eiches Acheres. In Chassidus, when they want to bring a mashal of something that's created yesh me'ayin, in our world, in the physical world, there isn't really anything that's really yesh me'ayin. Everything is yesh me'yesh. Like the Alter Rebbe speaks about that when an Uman makes a kli, he can leave the kli behind because it's the same metal, but now it's in a different shape. He's not making anything new. But in Chassidus, including in Tanya, he'll sometimes say a mashal for yesh me'ayin could be from this particular case. Because it's not the seed itself that's actually growing. The seed becomes nothing. The seed becomes nirkav ba'aretz. So that's almost like it's not there, and from the not there is what the tree grows out, what the chita grows. So therefore, that means that now, when you have this tree that's growing, or you have now this chita that's growing, so it's coming out a totally new thing. It's not a continuation. It's not just from one kernel you get a lot of wheat. No. From nothing you're getting a lot of wheat. Of course, before the nothing there was a kernel. But it's like a completely ishavas chadash, a completely new thing. And that's going to be a mashal for the neshama down here. V'chein hu gam b'yiridus v'aliyus ha-neshama, sha'derech la'agia l'tzmichas ha-neshama, aidei azriya ba'aretz, Ya'idei sha'adam betnua shel bitul al derech inyan harikavan. Bitul and rikavan is the same thing. He becomes nothing. He puts himself aside. V'nafshi ka'afar l'chaltiyah. Dahainu ha'avoida b'derech kabbalah soil. And we know kabbalah soil, the famous Perek Memalev, shireishis ha'avoida v'ikr v'sharshak v'shkasa b'tani kadisha. And when a person has this type of being planted in the ground, he has the recovery of the garden. He has the level of bittul. V'nafshi ka'afar l'chaltiyah. Shaydei zeh aliyas haneshama v'tzmichasa hi aliyah shaloi be'erech klal shenasis k'may metzias chadasha mamish. So it's not just like from one kernel of wheat becomes a lot of wheat, but it's a totally new metzias. The same thing, the neshama becomes not just better and more than it was before. It becomes so much greater and better than it was before in a way of a metzias chadasha lagamri. Base. Another thing that we see from Zriya, Kishem shebezriya gashmis nemar, hazoydim bedima berina yiktzoydu. They start off crying and then they are singing. When he's carrying the wheat, when he's carrying the seeds, he's crying. But when he's carrying the alumos of the bundles of wheat when they're finished, so then he's singing. He's in song. That the bitul beforehand not only creates, like we said before, so much more, and not only does it create that it should be like a savas chadasha, but even more so, it makes it be in a state of simcha, because we started off with bittul brings to simcha. So now the Rebbe says an interesting point. What does it mean that the bittul brings to simcha? One could just say balbatish. Of course, he's besimcha. Now he has wheat. Now he has food. Now he has what he worked for. He sees he finally got what he was working so hard for, so he's besimcha. So the Rebbe says something deeper. In Gashmis, it's taken that way. In Gashmis, the simcha is because I see the results. What I worked for was accomplished. But in Ruchnis, hasimcha misgalus beis ha'aliyam eina inyan tzaddi levad. The kivin sheroya atzmicha l'cheinu sameach. Ella hi shayeches la'aliyah gufa. The aliyahs haneshama shebegather tzmicha she aliyah shaloi be'erech ad shenasis kimetzias chadasha hi ha'yidei hasimcha davke. Here the Rebbe says a very interesting thing. It's not just that the simcha is a result, it's not just a mesuviv, but it helps the aliyah itself. The simcha is what helps that there should be an aliyah. Okay, do being in simcha peretzes gather shayde simcha mitis misbatlim kol agdorim v'agbol shelo adam. V'zeu sha'aliyah hanifla hanifelos b'neshama avidosa ba'aretz shenasis kimetzias chadasha kanal nasayde simcha pritzes agdorim chulu. Because if you want to have such a big growth in such a type of way that it's a savas chadasha, a person needs to go out of themselves. How do they go out of themselves? With simcha, because simcha is part together. So these two things go in hand. Through bitul and through simcha, a person breaks out of his limitations and he gains so much more that it's like a savas chadasha, a completely new metzias over what he was before he came down to Olam Hazagash. We said two things. There's bitul, like we said, the recovering, the garin stops being a garin, v'simcha. So both those things, bitul and simcha, yeshlam b'shalosh regalim. Mechad yisr regalim u'malashon regel. Literally, why is it called shalosh regalim? Because that was the time when Yidden were oila regel. And it's a halacha that the regel has to be functioning for a person to be oila regel. Shalachein katan sheini yachal lechas biyadu shalavi v'las min shalayim larabais pater meriyah. He's pater from being oila regel to see the Beis Hamikdash and the three regalim. Ki shalosh regalim ksiv. Ukepirish Rashi hara'u yirlalos beraglav chiyav akasiv. So only someone that can go by foot is mechuyev in it. A cotton that's too young to go by foot, he can't hold his father's hand and go by foot, he has no chiyuv. And another example of someone that has no chiyuv is, let's say, if he's physically handicapped. V'chein nisa b'gemara, the chigur baragle achas, he pater menariyah, shenam regalim. So we see that the word the regel means literally, by shalosh regalim, it's literally called regel, from the word foot. What is the idea of regel beruchnis? V'yadua sheregel moira la'avoid dekabol so mach shemayim. She'eino isra tzoyin Hashem beglal havanasi v'asagosay regel shliboy like avas Hashem b'yirosay. Ela oisa came machmas kabolos oil. The idea of a regel, the regel doesn't think. The regel is told what to do. You should jump into a hot mikveh, the regel goes. You should walk over here, the regel goes. It's the head that needs to be convinced. It's the heart that needs to be convinced. The avoida of the shalosh regalim shows on the avoida of bitul, of Kabbalah soil. It's not about my mind, it's not about my heart, it's about Kabbalah soil, which is v'zeu in harikav v'abitul shabazriyah. So that is how regalim, shalosh regalim, have to do with the first idea that smicha has, that the smicha happens because you have the recover hagarin, because you have the bittul. That's what a regel is. A regel is about bittul. The 3 Yom Tovim is times of simcha. And we said simcha is another component that brings the aliyah and the smicha shaloi be'erech via simcha mizgalas be'ezat smicha ve'aliyah. V'zoi gam hanekudam shetef shvein roshon l'regalim roshon l'mlachim. We asked in the last question at the beginning, what's the connection? Why is on the same date, Aleph B'Nissen, both Rosh Hashanah L'Melachim and Rosh Hashanah L'Regalim? Tafkidoi Shel Melech Yisrael. Sha'akavona B'Rosh Hashanah L'Melachim Him L'Malchi Yisrael, the Gemara Rosh Hashanah explains. Hu lifel b'chol am Yisrael inyan habitul Hashem. Zoyrim b'dimma bitul v'rekavim. Sha'ideize hu mailes b'nei Yisrael la'aliyah g'doyle b'yoyser. The avoida of a melech, the purpose of a melech, it says, Soim tosim alach melech. The Chazal say, what does it mean to put it upon you? Soim tosim alecha. So the Chazal say, Shetei emosei alecha. The job of a king is that the Yidden should fear him, and through that come to fear Hashem, like he's going to explain right now. The Tzemach Tzedek in Derech Tzesacha, Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Tzemach Tzedek, he explains at great length the famous question about, on the one hand, there's a mitzvah min ha-Torah, a mitzvah saseh, Shem Tassim Alech HaMelech. On the other hand, when the Yidden asked Shmuel HaNavi for a melech, so that Shmuel gave them over the head, what are you asking for a king for? And he discusses the whole idea. what the function of a melech is, legaba am Yisrael. That since a person might not have the appropriate bittul towards Hashem, so then he needs to have, through his bittul to the melech, so the melech will bring him up to have a bittul for Hashem. Let's see it inside. Okay, do a beer quite sad martzam asadek. Shin yom shel malch Yisrael hum lahamshich bechol bnei Yisrael habittul lemelech malchei amlachim hakadosh baruch. How does that happen? Just because I am scared of the king, am I going to have bittul to the Eibishter? Why? What's the connection? I might be scared of the king. That's fine. It reminds me, the Rebbe once expressed himself that a bacher these days that has bittul or has yir shamayim, I don't remember exactly how the Rebbe expressed it, is it's a greater chiddush and it's a greater bittul than a bacher that did so in Lubavitch. Why? Because in Lubavitch, you were scared. The whole time you were scared. You were scared of the policeman, you were scared of the czar, you were scared of the governor. Anybody could take you, throw you in prison for nothing, could even kill you, whatever. There was no less din, less dying. You were terrified of them. So it was very easy. You had the idea of the fear of the king, and then to say, okay, just like I'm fearful of the king, how much more so, Melech Malcham Lachim. And when you use these terms, Melech Malcham Lachim, and you know already what your fear of a king is, but in America, where nobody's scared of anybody, you're not scared of the police, you're not scared of the president, there is no king. So, you're b'chlal not used to the concept of being bottled to anybody. And still in all, you have bittul before the Eibishter. That's a chiddush. That's a nuftu. In a similar vein, but it's going to be even deeper, when the Yidden have bittul for the Melech, and the Melech himself has an even greater bittul for the Eibishter, so then automatically your bittul is going to be to the Eibishter also that way, or to a certain degree. So first he's going to explain what's the bittul of the king. Dini Eitzel Malch Yisrael tzarech liyis tachlis v'shleimus habittul Hashem k'maimer Chazal ein al gabav el Hashem alakov. When it comes to Sanhedrin or others, there's different levels, but when it comes to the Melech, it says ein al gabav el Hashem alakov. And therefore this actually comes out in a halacha. There's a halacha l'maisa because of this. Shalachein hamelech kivin shekara shuv ein zoykif. By us, when we daven, we know there are certain parts of davening we bow down, and certain parts of davening that we straighten up afterwards. Most of the davening, our head is straight up. The melech, when he bends down by Shemoneh Esrei, that's it. He stays bent down the whole Shemoneh Esrei. She'ein ze inyan shel zehirus. It's not just he's being extra careful. Shelo yigba libay mitzadei snas b'torn melech. We're worried. You know what? He has to be very careful. He is a melech. Because he's a melech, so it could be that he's going to get a lot of gaiva. So we say, let's bend this the other way. Let's go ahead and say extra bittul for him to prevent him from having that gaiva. So he says, no. It's not a preventative thing. This is what the melech is about. To have that type of bittul. He cannot bring himself. He's so bottled that once he bends down, he doesn't have the courage and the strength to straighten up afterwards. And then, once the king is bottled to the Eibishter, then like we brought this Maimer Chazal before. You could even say about it balabatish. If you see that a person that you respect is in respect and is in awe of someone greater, so then that's going to bring you to respect the person that he respects. The same thing, when the Yidden see the Melech, how bottle he is to Hashem, So even though they on their own might not have a bittul to the Eibishter, but since they have a bittul to the king, and the king is bottled to the Eibishter, so then they get that bittul of the king into them. Yesh loymar, shaydei bittul zeh shalom lamelech, harei hu magbiya umayla oisam lemadregel yoyna yoyser. The yoysha melech hu betach sais nasas v'arei memoyes, that doesn't just mean physically, even though the simple pasuk means that physically Shaul HaMelech was like what they used the English expression, head and shoulders above the rest. That he was like Pasha taller than everybody else. But it means Beruchnis. That Beruchnis, he was higher, so he is uplifted. It means he's uplifted and higher than the nation. לכן ביכולתי להגביה ולהליץ את בני ישראל לעלייה גדולה כזו שלמעלה מזו שמצד עצמם בדוגמס עניין הצמיחה שישהבס חדושה כנ"ל. The Rebbe is mitzayin over here to Derech Tzedakah, where he talks about Mashiach. It says about Mashiach's times, everybody will be bottled anyway. So why does Mashiach have to be a melech as well? Mashiach is going to be a Rav, he's going to teach us Torah, it says. But why does Mashiach also have to be a melech? Seemingly, now, when there are people that do have bittul to the Eibishter and people that don't have bittul to the Eibishter, so then, at least for the people that don't have bittul, you need to have the king, so that through being bottled to the king, you'll become bottled to the Eibishter. But what's going to be when Mashiach comes? So the Tzemach Tzedek explains, as high as their bittul is on their own, the king's bittul to the Eibishter is so much higher. And through his bittul to the Eibishter, he's going to bring the Yidden even higher. So there's the bittul, that's what he's saying, the bittul that the Yidden have on their own, and then the king brings them to even higher level of bittul. Like we said before, that when the tree grows, or when the wheat grows, it's like a sabas chadasha legamri. It's a completely new creation. Even though we said two things are the connection between regolim and the idea of tzmicha. One thing is the bittul, because the bittul makes it grow, and that's what happens with regolim. There's the idea of regel bittul, and the king is the level of bittul. And then there's another thing about regolim. Regolim is a time of simcha, and simcha also causes the aliyah, that through the simcha he's oilam much higher. So he says, in the simcha of Yom Tov, there's different levels. Three times by Sukkot does it say the idea of being sameach. Doesn't say even once by Chag Pesach. And by Shavuos it says one time. Lama at the moitzah shebet Pesach hatzvua nidonis ve'adam yedei moisa shana tvuim einoisa. So since it's a time just like Chamisha B'Shvat is the time when the Ilonis is the Rosh Hashanah when they're being judged, and Pesach is when the Tvua is being judged. Lefichach en kasav shram simcha. Just like it says, Rosh Hashanah is not a time to say Hallel. Why? Because if the whole world is being judged, what are we doing singing Hallel? It's not a time of Simcha, it's not a time of Hallel. The same thing, Pesach, it doesn't say openly Simcha, even though there's still the mitzvah of Simcha, because it's the time when Tvua is being judged. El Simcha Achas. V'lam mekasav b'Simcha Achas pnei she'atvua nichneses b'fnim. U'ma tam ein kasav shtam shtei simchas by Shavuos. Lefi she'peiris ha'ilon nidonim. It's a little bit different than the Rosh Hashanah Leilonis. Aval b'chag, but on Sukkot, lefi she'atvua v'peiris ilon b'fnim. Both of them come inside the house. Both of them are brought in from being outside in the summer, in drying and so on. Leficha kasav shalosh simchas. It says 3 times the word simcha. V'nimtzam shegoyd la simcha dechag hasukis u'lefisha oz peiris ha'ilon b'fnim v'loyrak hatvua shenichneses b'fnim b'zman hatzeres. So the Rebbe is now going to explain that there's a difference, And this has to do with Chamisha B'Shvat, because it's Rosh Hashanah and Leilonis. By the way, as a side point, I mentioned today in the Minyan in Cooper City, it's really, the reason why we make such a big deal and that we talk about Tu B'Shvat is really, if you think about it, in our Siddur, it says, like a list of the times of the year that you don't say Tach. Over there, between Ashrei and Lam Natseach, it says over there, this date, this date, this date, this date. If you look through all the dates, all of them have like a practical thing that occurred or happens with Yidden. Obviously, Yom Tovim, Chanukah and Purim, Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, even Chamisha B'Av. These are things that happen with Yidden, that they were dancing and they were singing over there and they were getting married and so on. In the whole list of things, Chamisha B'Shvat is like trees. So what? There's a lot of significant dates in the Jewish calendar. If you go through a Jewish calendar, there's a lot of things that take place. You have over 3,000-4,000 years of history, a lot of events happen. There's a sefer called Var Yom B'Yoymoy that the Rebbe used to talk about a lot of times. Any day on the Jewish calendar, you can find something special that happened on that day. But it doesn't mean that we don't say Tachnun. Even on a Bar Mitzvah, the Rebbe says we don't say Tachnun, and he explains the whole reason why. So a Bar Mitzvah kid doesn't say Tachnun on the day of his Bar Mitzvah. A Yom Haledes doesn't say Tachnun on the days of Yom Haledes. Does not leave out Tachnun. That's what I'm sorry. A Bar Mitzvah boy does not leave out Tachnun on his Bar Mitzvah. A Bal Yom Haledes does not leave out Tachnun on his Yom Haledes. All of a sudden, the Rosh Hashanah of a tree, the Rosh Hashanah of a tree, you don't say Tachnun. Not only don't you say Tachnun, already from Chatzos Hayom, starting if you're benching after Chatzos yesterday, you wouldn't say Al Nars Bavel, you say Shir HaMailas. By Mincha yesterday, you didn't say Tachnun. It's really, if you think about it, it's really a strange thing. It's the last thing in the whole list. But it's like, what? When? Okay, it's Rosh Hashanah Leilonis. So what? Why go crazy about Rosh Hashanah Leilonis? So that's why we're the whole time finding different tchunas, how we connect to Ilonis. Ki Adam Eitz Asada, even though he doesn't bring this pasuk here in this whole sikha, Ki Adam Eitz Asada, but the whole sikha is about how a person's avodah is completely reflecting how a tree grows. Up till now, we were talking about thru in general. Now he's going to talk about the special milah that trees have over grain, that the trees have over crop, over barley, wheat, and things like that. And this is Igeres HaKodesh in Tanya speaks about it, Barichas, many, many more details than he says over here. That when it comes to wheat, and I plant the wheat in the ground, what happens? I'm taking a kernel of wheat, and what's growing? A lot of kernels of wheat. What is the chiddush over here? It's a chiddush bekamus. From one kernel, you get maybe hundreds of kernels of wheat. But it's not a change be'echus. You put a kernel of wheat in the ground, and you're getting kernels of wheat. Another chisaron, he doesn't talk about it here, is that it's only a one-time event. It doesn't remain forever. Once you planted it, next season, you got to plant it again. This kernel of wheat is not lasting forever. You cut down these stalks of wheat, and you have to start from anew. A tree, when you plant a pit of an orange, a date, a fig, whatever it is, you get not a kernel of a fig, you're getting a whole fruit with leaves, with a tree, and the tree lasts, and it's, you don't have to always replant that tree. That tree could last forever. So the chiluk and the tzmicha that happens from a garden of an ilan, of a peri, is shaloi be'erech. It's be'eches, what you're putting in the ground to what's growing out from it. And the time that it lasts and so on. So therefore, this whole idea of the mila of tzmicha, if you really want to look at the mila of tzmicha, you see it even more by an ilan than you see it by a tvua. Again, Rashon Leilonis. Let's see it inside. V'yeshloimar, third paragraph, second column. V'yeshloimar tama pnimi lezeh behem shklanal. Why are we extra simcha by Sukkot? Because Sukkot, it's not just that we're bringing in the tvua, but we're also bringing in the Peiros HaIlan, because Peiros HaIlan have an even greater simcha attached to them. Hatchunas hanal shebeinin hazriya harein biyaser seis biyaser oz biilanis. Shari ein tzmichas hatvua begeder metzias chadash mamish begolui. Why? Ki gam hazeran nizru chita yisoyra v'kiyotz b'zeh. The very same thing that you are harvesting was the same thing you put in the ground. Sheyesh beitam v'roi la'achila. This kernel of chita, this kernel of soira, is the same kernel that's later going to be eaten. In other words, the same type of thing that's later going to be eaten. You can't eat apple seeds. You can't eat olive seeds. You can't eat grape seeds. It's not something that normal people eat at least. Zriya is the word that's used when you're talking about tvua. In English, they use the word sowing. When you're talking about an ilan, you use the word netia. That's called in English planting. B'negea lezman hatzmicha, there's a difference between zriya and netia. The bezriya ain't tzarech shus kol kach v'ikav zman hazriya ad hatzmicha. It doesn't take as long because it's not going through such a change. You're not making such a big difference. It takes a long time between planting the seed until you have the tree grow and you can eat the fruits and so on. That's an eiches dicke difference. It's an eiches dicke chiddush. On the other hand, ula idach yesh ma'ila gedoyla b'tzmichas peiros ha'ilon l'gab b'tzmichas tvua. The peiros ha'ilon ru'im lachila miyad. You pick it from the tree and you eat it. That's it. The loike tvua sha'achita nitzmachas eina ru'uya l'maychol k'may shehi. You can't go ahead and pick some wheat and eat the kernels. But tzarech kava malachis atchanas ru'ya la'achila. You need to separate it. You need to grind it. You need to bake it, and so on. וזהו הטעם לגוי לשמחה של חג הסוכות דווקא דכיוון שעזו לא רק הסיבוס התבוע אלא גם בפרס האילון נמצא שעוז דווקא הסוכות הוא זמן תכלס השלמס בעניין הצמיחה ועל פי כל הנ"ל מובנס השייכות בין ראש השנה למלכים לרגלים שבתחילת המשנה לראש השנה לאילון שבסוף המשנה that we said the notes tchilas בסוף that the beginning of the Mishnah is connected to the end. Which is that's what the idea of the melech does. That's the idea of the Yom Tov, that through the bitul of the melech and through the simcha and bitul of the Yom Tov, you can get a great smicha, a yishavas chadasha. Rosh Shana Le'ilan, not specific from Rosh Shana Le'ilan, Shabbai Mudgeshes Shleimus in that Tzmicha, Shibilan is Dafke Kanal. Because the highest form of Tzmicha, the greatest gain of Tzmicha, is Ilanis. And that's why Kiyodam Eitz Asad, again, he doesn't use it over here, that a person is like it, he does say it. I mean, he's going to say, I'm sorry, how did I say that? I made a mistake. I said that the Rebbe doesn't mention Adam Eitz Asad. By the end he mentions it. Because the Adam Eitz Asad, it's dafke the eitz, not the sada, because that's the greatest mila. The greatest mila is being a tree, not being a stalk of wheat. The Torah. V'hainu l'fisha b'toira, mudgish ha'atzlacha b'tluya b'inyan ha'yegia dafke shetiu ha'meilim b'toira. K'mayim yagaito matzasa. What does amal b'toira have to do with tzmicha? What does the yegia have to do with the idea of tzmicha? Shaydei ha'amal v'yegia b'toira. And what's that an expression of? Hakshurim im bitul adam. When a person is misyageya, when a person puts in effort, that shows that he's being mevatel himself. Like a person coming 10 o'clock at night to Shir Chassidus. That's yegia, that's effort, that's hard work, it's not easy. Zaychim letzmicha v'atzlacha shaloi be'erech liyegia. And then, the result is, hamevi l'simcha amitis, hazoynim bedima berina yiktzayru.